While flatbreads and bagels are probably my favourite form of bread, I do like a good slice of toast or fresh bread, and this is how I make it. I put 500 ml of filtered water into a bowl, and you don't have to use these exact quantities, but you can adapt them. And then I add some dried yeast to the water. I like to do this because the yeast can mix in well. Some people just put the dried yeast into the dry mix, and it seems to work for them. But here I've got a 1/4 teaspoon measure, and I heap it up a little bit, so it's more than 1/4 teaspoon. And then I whisk it in just to distribute it in the water, make sure all the particles of yeast are broken apart. And I don't think I whisked it particularly well in this example because I can see some swirling in the middle, but it's near enough, and the loaf worked out okay. I then add some flour so that the mix is still wet, and I stir it all together. The idea that I have is that the yeast is going to distribute itself around the flour, and in this case the first 2 cups of flour were organic wholemeal flour, and I figure this is a good place for the yeast to hang out, is in amongst the wholemeal flour. I mix it well, and then I add the remaining flour. So in this case it's a 50-50 mix. I've got 2 cups of whole organic flour, then I've got 2 cups of strong bread flour or high grade flour from the supermarket, and I add my salt on top of the flour, and that's a 1/2 teaspoon measure. So there's 3 of those, it's 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I like to do this, I don't like to put the salt in direct contact with the yeast, so I mix the yeast for a start, then I mix the salt and the remaining flour together just so that some yeast doesn't get shocked by concentrated salt. Now about the yeast, that yeast is very good. It has a limited use by date, and it says once it's opened, you've got, well, the instructions I saw online, you've got to use it within so many days. However, I've started freezing my yeast in a screw top jar, and it lasts for ages. It lasts for over a year. And it just comes to life, and I've never been let down by the yeast. And that yeast should be back in the freezer now, but because I'm making a video, I'm being a bit slack about putting it back in the freezer. So here you can see the dough's a bit wet. The amount of water that you use, or the ratio of water to flour, may vary to get the right texture depending on what flour you've got. And I've found that, well, I think this wholemeal flour that I'm using, it doesn't absorb the water as well, so I just need a bit more flour. So I've added a wee bit more wholemeal flour, and this is organic wholemeal flour that's milled in New Zealand. Quite expensive, but kind of nice. I know theoretically it hasn't got any additives or glyphosate floating around in it. Still a bit wet, so we're adding a wee bit more flour. This sort of overnight bread or ciabatta or things like that, they seem to want a wetter dough. If I was making a quick yeast loaf, I'd use 100 ml of water for every cup of flour. In this case it works out at about 120 ml of water for every cup of flour. So it's still a pretty sticky sort of a dough, and you don't have to make it exactly like that. Find out what's right for you. I might be inclined to make it a bit drier next time, but this loaf worked out all right. So that's what it looks like, and we're going to just let it sit overnight. So on a warm night it might be ready after 8 hours or so. Other days you might have to leave it a bit longer. But you can see that it's sort of fluffed up there. And when I start scraping it away from the edge of the bowl, you can see it's stringy, and you can see there's bubbles within it. So this is the second rise. And you might even say I'm forming a loaf here, but because the dough is so sloppy, it just flows and you can't really form a decent loaf. I could tip it into a Bannerton basket or a smaller bowl, but why? It's just using another utensil. So what I'm doing here is I'm sprinkling the wholemeal flour. Any flour would do, but the wholemeal is pretty good. just to help separate it from the surface of the bowl, make it easier to move. I'm putting a good sprinkling of flour all around this dough, but you'll note I'm not pressing the dough too hard. I'm trying not to burst the bubbles or break the structure up. I'm just moving it into a decent shape. It does reduce the size of it, but now there's a layer of flour around the outside. It doesn't stop it from sticking completely, but I'm sure it helps. Some recipes would call to put this in a tea towel or in a basket at this stage, but I just like to leave it in the bowl. So now we've preheated this Dutch oven, and the second rise took maybe 2 hours or about that time. It varies on the temperature of the kitchen. So you can't see much of the flour there, but it's still on the surface to some extent, which should make it easier to tip out of the bowl. I'm just sort of gingerly scraping it away from the bowl, trying not to squash the air bubbles out of the carbon dioxide bubbles out of the loaf. I'm not really watching what I'm doing there, and I'll let some run down the side of the Dutch oven, but it doesn't really matter. So that's very hot, so I get the lid on it and I stick it in the oven for half an hour, and at the end of that half hour off comes the lid, and that's looking pretty acceptable. Now I could have been all fancy and put a slit on the top of the loaf, but I just let it make its own slit. But now that that's done, we're going to put it back in for maybe another 15 minutes until the top's brown and we've got rid of some of the moisture out of the loaf. So we're setting that timer for 15 minutes. Now I haven't really edited the dough working part of this, so this is as quick as it is. You know, as long as the video, it's about the preparation time. And there we go. That's after 3/4 of an hour all up of cooking. Nice little loaf. Nice hollow sound. All good to go. I hope this is useful to somebody.